And for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 25th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Meta Platforms agreed to buy 6 gigawatts worth of artificial intelligence computing power from AMD in a deal valued at more than $100 billion that could result in Meta owning as much as 10% of the chip maker's stock. The chip deal helped fuel a rally in U.S. stocks that lifted both the S&P 500 and Dow Industrials by 0.8% and the NASDAQ by 1%. Novo Nordisk plans to slash U.S. list prices for its popular weight loss and diabetes drugs, Wegovy and Ozempic, by up to half starting next year. Novo Nordisk and United Biotechnology said an experimental obesity drug they are jointly developing helped patients lose weight in a mid-stage clinical trial in China. U.S. home price growth slowed to its lowest annual level in over a decade as mortgage rates and inflation continued to weigh on buyers. Warner Brothers Discovery said it received a revised offer from Paramount to buy the entire company for $31 a share, up from its previous offer of $30 a share. Spirit Airlines reached an agreement with its lenders to emerge from bankruptcy by early summer as a smaller company. Home Depot reported lower fiscal fourth quarter profit as U.S. economic and fiscal headwinds discouraged people from undertaking home improvements. BYD enjoyed a nearly threefold increase in European sales last month as its electric and hybrid vehicles remain in high demand on the continent. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Trump touted a turnaround for the ages after retaking the White House 13 months ago, seeking in his State of the Union address to convince skeptical Americans that he had unleashed a new era of prosperity. The Trump administration is weighing a possible executive order or other action that would require banks to collect citizenship information from customers. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave Anthropic Chief Executive Dario Amodei until Friday to comply with the Pentagon's demands on using its AI models or face cancellation of the company's contract. Bill Gates apologized to staff of the Gates Foundation over his ties to Epstein, admitting he made mistakes while insisting he didn't participate in Epstein's crimes. The House failed to pass a sweeping air safety bill, a measure backed by families of victims of a 2025 mid-air collision, after objections from the Pentagon. The family of Nancy Guthrie offered a $1 million reward for information leading to her return. Tensions grew between Iranian anti-regime activists and pro-government militias as the two sides clashed for a fourth consecutive day. The head of the Louvre stepped down after pressure was applied to the museum's leadership over staff strikes, maintenance problems, and security weaknesses. Died Robert Carradine, 71, film and television actor. The picture on today's front page shows President Trump addressing Congress as Vice President and Speaker of the House are standing behind him applauding. And that caption reads, President Trump addressed Congress on Tuesday in front of Vice President J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson. Then there is another picture showing the U.S. hockey team, and that caption reads, members of the U.S. Olympic hockey team were recognized for their gold medal win. And the article, Trump seeks to quell anxiety on economy, touts turnaround. Speech aims to sell Americans on an era of prosperity as GOP eyes midterms warily. By Alex Leary and Aaron Zittner, Washington. President Trump told a national audience on Tuesday that he had unleashed a new age of economic prosperity. One thing he didn't say, I feel your pain. At the core of Trump's State of the Union address was a calculation that he can persuade the nation that the economy is in better shape than many people think it is. In touting a turnaround for the ages, the president opted against sending a message to voters that he understands the anxiety that polling shows is widely felt, including among swing voters the GOP needs to preserve its congressional majorities in this fall's midterm elections. Our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever, Trump declared at the start of his speech, which clocked in at a record 1 hour and 48 minutes. Polls find that voters are unhappy with Trump's handling of the economy. In a Wall Street Journal survey last month, voters gave the president low marks when asked if he cares about people like you, is looking out for the middle class, and has the right priorities. For months, Trump's top advisors have urged him to focus on the economy, but his attention has often shifted to other subjects, including foreign affairs. As he spoke, Trump was weighing military strikes in Iran. On Tuesday, Trump made the economy a central focus of his speech, even as he touched on other subjects. He blamed his Democratic predecessor for high inflation and other problems and outlined affordability proposals. He said he would move to impose limits on investors buying large numbers of homes and giving people without access to a retirement savings plan at work the opportunity to invest in the retirement plan for federal workers. He defended his aggressive use of tariffs, which have strained longtime GOP orthodoxy and given air to Democratic arguments he is driving higher prices on consumers. In between remarks about the economy, Trump launched pointed attacks against Democrats over immigration and crime, setting off tense exchanges with lawmakers in the House chamber. He emphasized themes of patriotism and American exceptionalism, heralding the 250th birthday of the nation and celebrating the U.S. men's gold medal hockey team. Trump, a Republican, might face hurdles in persuading the country that the traditional measures of the nation's economic health are strong at a moment when economic sentiment is low. While inflation has cooled, U.S. economic growth slowed at the end of last year. The economy created only 181,000 jobs in 2025, though jobs gains rebounded in January. Trump pointed to the robust stock market and the 401k retirement accounts, as well as falling mortgage interest rates. He touted last year's tax cuts, which are producing larger refunds this year, as well as provisions such as no tax on tips and deals to lower prescription drug costs. He announced a plan to shield consumers from electricity rate hikes caused by AI data centers. He pressed Congress to pass legislation codifying the health care framework he released earlier this year, a plan that has lukewarm support among Republicans facing elections. Some of the proposals showed Trump adopting a populist stance in which he is willing to intervene in markets and place restrictions on corporations, continuing his partial break from the traditional Republican pro-business outlook that long guided the GOP. He cast himself as the champion of voters disillusioned by political leaders. From trade to health care, from energy to immigration, everything was stolen and rigged in order to drain the wealth out of the productive, hard-working people who make our country great, who make our country run, Trump said. One of Trump's challenges is that his natural impulses as a salesman conflict with what many strategists see as a political imperative to show that he understands the economic anxiety many feel. Last week in a speech in Georgia, Trump said, "I've won affordability," citing lower gas prices and moderating inflation. Matthew Bartlett, a Republican strategist, said Trump risked looking out of touch by touting positive economic numbers rather than more directly addressing economic anxiety. "I'm not sure any aspirational speech changes your electric bill, your grocery bill, or tuition," he said. But Wes Anderson, a pollster whose clients include the House GOP campaign arm, said Trump probably helped himself by laying out affordability proposals. The "I feel your pain" has never been a Trump speech, he said. That's not a gear in his gearbox. Former President Barack Obama unsuccessfully tried to convince voters to stick with Democrats ahead of the first midterm election after he took office, at a time when Americans were reeling from the financial crisis of 2008. Do we return to the same failed policies that ran our economy into a ditch, or do we keep moving forward with policies that are slowly pulling us out? Obama asked just before the 2010 midterms. Democrats ended up losing more than 60 House seats. Trump's GOP has a razor-thin majority in the House. Trump echoed many of the themes that he has adopted since he entered the political stage in 2015, with the president blaming immigrants for violent crime and fraud, and alleging that Democrats want to cheat in elections. The speech at times took on the air of a campaign rally as Trump castigated Democrats for allegedly failing to back efforts to remove violent criminals from the U.S. "You should be ashamed," yelled Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat from Minnesota, interrupting Trump as he criticized Democratic-led cities that have withheld support from federal immigration officers. In the Democrats' rebuttal to the president's address, Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger criticized Trump's economic policies and his immigration crackdown. "Our broken immigration system is something to be fixed, not an excuse for an unaccountable agents to terrorize our communities," she said. Americans have increasingly soured on Trump's presidency, with 41% approving of his job performance and 57% disapproving, according to an average of polls collected by the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. Some 56% of voters said Trump doesn't have the right priorities, a Wall Street Journal poll found last month, and 58% disapprove of his handling of inflation. Polling data has consistently shown that voters question whether the administration has consistently prioritized cost of living, said Ken Spain, a Republican communications consultant who now advises businesses. The president likely made incremental headway tonight, but there remains a sizable political deficit to make up. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Other articles from the front page follow. Meta, AMD strike massive chip deal. Agreement aimed at countering NVIDIA is valued at more than $100 billion. By Robbie Wayland and Megan Brabowski. Meta Platforms has agreed to buy 6 gigawatts worth of artificial intelligence computing power from Advanced Micro Devices in a deal valued at more than $100 billion that could result in Meta owning as much as 10% of AMD's stock. The deal, unveiled on Tuesday, represents a coup for AMD in its efforts to challenge NVIDIA in the market for selling graphics processing units, or GPUs, the microchips powering the AI boom. Under Tuesday's agreement, Meta will buy enough of AMD's latest chips to power data centers using up to 6 gigawatts of computing power over the next 5 years. Each gigawatt of computing power means several tens of billions of dollars in revenue for AMD, the company said. Meta is expected to deploy the first gigawatt starting later this year. As part of the arrangement, AMD agreed to give Meta warrants to buy up to 160 million AMD shares, or about 10% of the company, for a penny apiece, as long as certain milestones are met. The full stock award is conditional on a rise in AMD's share price. Meta would only receive the final tranche of shares once AMD's stock hits $600. It closed up 8.8% at $213.84 on Tuesday. With a limited number of large buyers of their chips, both NVIDIA and AMD have been using novel financing mechanisms to lock key customers into long-term agreements to use their technology. Tech firms monitor workers' use of bots by Catherine Bindley and Catherine Blunt. AI use is no longer optional if you work in tech. While many sectors are still experimenting with artificial intelligence, the tech industry has moved to the next phase, tracking their workers' use of AI tools and enforcing it if they have to do so. From small startups to giants including Amazon, Alphabet's Google, and Meta platforms, tech companies are measuring it with an eye on productivity gains and, in certain cases, factoring it into performance reviews. For some jobs, candidates aren't even considered unless they can demonstrate AI fluency. "We are using carrots and sticks," said Seth Besmernick, Chief Executive of Conductor, a 300-person digital marketing startup. "The only way to have a thriving company is if you have all your staff having a high level of competency." AI-led stock sell-off upends forecast for bountiful IPO year, by Corey Drebush. This was supposed to be a blockbuster year for initial public offerings. Artificial intelligence fears spoiled the party. Investors have been thirsting for new issues and big names, including SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic, are still readying debuts for later this year. The momentum created an opening for dozens of smaller, mainly private equity-backed software firms that had been waiting in the wings. Then fears that AI will upend the software industry sent stocks tumbling this month. The sell-off accelerated Monday after a viral blog post about the threat posed by AI. Bankers and investors now expect the few mega offerings to dominate the year. Most private tech companies, many that have spent years biding their time, will be forced to keep waiting it out. The U.S. IPO market, dormant for years, finally started to look up for tech companies last year. Among the early casualties are Blackstone-backed Liftoff Mobile, a marketing platform that pulled its planned offering earlier this month, and the fintech-powered broker ClearStreet, which withdrew its IPO plans last week, citing poor market conditions. 3/4 of tech companies that debuted last year are now trading below their IPO prices, with the whole class of 2025 tech IPOs down an average of 18% through Tuesday's close, according to Deal Logic, which analyzed companies that raised at least $50 million in offerings. Maduro is gone, but the regime remains. The U.S. expects Venezuela's leaders to attract investors by fixing all they broke. By Paul Kiernan. Dozens of armed government agents swarmed the offices of shrimp producer Grupo Lamar, a family-owned business that had emerged as one of Venezuela's largest exporters after the collapse of the oil industry. "The owners are terrorists," agents told petrified workers. "You now work for the Venezuelan state," the agent said, according to people familiar with what happened. In a news conference about the seizure, Venezuela's interior minister said Grupo Lamar's owners had been plotting to overthrow the government, sabotage the electric grid, and even ruin the holiday season. "'Tis the same playbook as always, trying to cancel Christmas in Venezuela," said Cabello, the interior minister, who is responsible for quashing dissent against the regime. Venezuelan officials fired top managers at Grupo Lamar and took control of operations. Before long, shrimp exports were falling even faster than oil output had dropped years earlier. No one was surprised. The regime has been seizing companies and running them into the ground for more than 2 decades, turning what was once Latin America's most affluent country into one of its poorest. President Trump is now betting those same officials can resurrect Venezuela's economy and make the country safe for the $100 billion in private investment that he is trying to coax from American oil companies. It is a tall order, given the regime's 27-year record of corruption, lawlessness, and hyperinflation that has led to food shortages. After American commandos whisked former President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores out of the country last month, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, was left in charge as interim president. She, along with Maduro, Cabello, and other insiders, had ruled an economy the International Monetary Fund estimates contracted nearly 70% from 2013 to 2025. More than 8 million Venezuelans have fled abroad since 2014, exceeding the number who escaped wars in Syria and Ukraine. Maduro's family and allies, meanwhile, allegedly reaped illicit profits that U.S. prosecutors say amount to billions of dollars. U.S. officials allege Maduro turned Venezuela into a narco state. "We are dealing with people over there that have spent most of their lives living in a gangster paradise," Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in a January 28th Senate hearing. Relatives of Flores, Maduro's wife, controlled financing at Petróleos de Venezuela S.A., the state-owned company known as PDVSA, and black market oil sales, and engaged in money laundering, according to U.S. prosecutors and Venezuela experts. Maduro and Flores are in U.S. custody awaiting trial on drug trafficking charges. They have denied wrongdoing. To ensure their loyalty, the regime gave members of the Venezuelan military and security forces a green light to operate such side businesses as illegal gold mining in Venezuela's jungles, extortion rackets, and shakedowns, according to U.S. prosecutors. Alejandro Andrade, national treasurer from 2007 to 2010, admitted to pocketing more than $1 billion in bribes to allow businessmen to conduct illicit foreign currency transactions. Cabello has been accused by Venezuela's former top prosecutor of taking $100 million in bribes from Brazilian construction firm Odebrecht in exchange for state contracts. The U.S. has offered a $25 million bounty for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Through a spokeswoman, Cabello denied the allegations involving Odebrecht and disputes the claim that he directs armed militias. The U.S. is banking on Rodriguez to keep the peace, but Venezuelan experts say her power will be tested should armed groups controlled by her allies lose access to cash streams from oil, gold smuggling, and drug trafficking. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. There's a picture of a mother holding a young child pointing to a wall where individual pictures are shown. And that headline reads, "Ukrainians not broken after 4 years of war." President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday declared Russia hasn't broken Ukrainians nor triumphed in the war that has tested the resolve of Kyiv and its allies and fueled European fears about the scale of Moscow's ambitions. More than a dozen senior European officials went to Kyiv to mark the 4th anniversary of the conflict, which has killed tens of thousands of people, upended life for millions of Ukrainians, and created instability beyond its borders. Above, a girl touches a portrait of her father Tuesday, while she and her mother visit a memorial in Kyiv dedicated to fallen Ukrainian defenders. Zelensky said Ukraine has withstood the onslaught by Russia's bigger and better equipped army, which in the past year captured just 0.79% of Ukraine's territory, according to the Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank. Russia now holds nearly 20% of Ukraine. Looking back at the beginning of the invasion and reflecting on today, we have every right to say we have defended our independence. We have not lost our statehood, Zelensky said on social media, adding that Russian President Vladimir Putin has not achieved his goals. Putin didn't mention the anniversary on Tuesday. And that article was from the Associated Press. From the editorial page, it's a miracle, a cheap Pentagon missile. The Air Force has built the ERAM, E-R-A-M, cruise missile in 16 months. Many readers are aware that the United States isn't producing enough bombs and missiles, and across the press you'll find resignation about American industrial capacity. So allow us to bring you a good news story. A new, cheap American cruise missile developed in 16 months. The Air Force says it has conducted a live fire test of the Extended Range Attack Munition known as ERAM. The missile was needed to help Ukraine pack more standoff firepower against Vladimir Putin's imperial aggression. The weapon is being built by 2 defense tech companies and moved from initial contracting to testing in less than 2 years. This is miraculous in the world of military procurement. A second achievement is low cost. By rough estimates, ERAM may be $250,000 a pop versus other long-range fires that run into the millions for a single shot. This better price is crucial for having enough rounds to sustain a long fight and improving the cost curve problem of upending pricey Western missiles to shoot down cheap drones and projectiles. Ukraine plans to buy up to 3,350 ERAMs. Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark are pitching in to help pick up the bill for Ukraine. Nobody is hanging a mission accomplished banner on the industrial base, and 16 months is still a long time in a war of attrition. We can do better than that, but that's impressive, as Mississippi GOP Senator Roger Wicker said recently. But the EROM is a reminder that the U.S. can throw off the shackles of the Pentagon acquisitions bureaucracy when the stakes are significant. Too many in Washington are using American weapons shortfalls as an excuse to constrain the U.S. from defending its interest, including forcing a lousy peace in Ukraine. The Pentagon leaks to the press about potential missile shortages. If the U.S. goes to war again with Iran is another example. But the EROM is a reminder that the world's most dynamic economy can still make the choice and muster the ingenuity to defend itself and its allies if it wants to. Beijing's trade war against Japan. While President Trump's tariffs consume the world's attention, China is intensifying its trade coercion against Japan. The latest sally is a new round of export restrictions released this week. Chinese exports to 20 Japanese companies will require a certification process, Beijing announced, with details to come about what that process is. Another 20 Japanese firms face a blanket restriction on dual-use products that can have either military or civilian applications. Don't expect Beijing to take a conservative approach to defining military uses here. Beijing says it's trying to deter Japanese militarization, and it takes one to know one. The move is the latest step in an escalating spat that started in the autumn when Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi warned that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could constitute a national security threat to Japan that would allow Japan to intervene. Ms. Takaichi also wants to increase Japanese defense spending to put muscle behind such statements. Chinese officials first tried to frighten Ms. Takaichi off such a hawkish line with insulting rhetoric. When that didn't work, they turned to economic pressure. These latest export controls follow various restrictions on exports of rare earth minerals to Japan, as well as efforts to discourage Chinese tourism. So far, it isn't working, perhaps because Beijing's bullying reinforces what a danger Chinese militarism poses to regional security. This is becoming a lesson for everyone else too, including Washington. Japan's economy is large and resilient enough to withstand this pressure for some time, but not forever without help. Its trading partners could assist, especially if Mr. Trump drops his out-of-date economic worries about Japanese competition with the U.S. and gives an ally a boost instead. European nations also have a stake in helping Tokyo resist this coercion before China starts turning its economic guns on them. The first opportunity will be President Trump's upcoming visit to Beijing, where trade policy will be on the agenda. If Mr. Trump insists on going, he can at least use the visit to remind Chinese President Xi Jinping that America's interest in the region include the prosperity and defense of our allies. From the opinion pages, America needs a lot more weapons. We need a high-low mix of exquisite, expensive munitions and inexpensive, mass-produced ones. By Christian Brose. With President Trump planning to request $1.5 trillion for defense, leaders in Congress and the Pentagon agree on one problem that must be addressed. The U.S. needs more weapons, a lot more. In a conflict with China, the U.S. would run out of critical munitions in days, according to the results of war games. Recent events strengthen the case for weapons inventory. Ukraine expended a decade's worth of U.S.-produced anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons in months of combat against Russia in 2022. In a few days of air defense operations against Iran last year, the U.S. fired 1/4 of its terminal high-altitude area defense missiles, billions of dollars of weapons that took years to produce. America has a new missile gap, but why? And what to do about it? The answers aren't obvious, and if we get them wrong, we risk squandering Mr. Trump's historic budget increase. The common refrain is that Washington has underinvested in weapons, and there is truth to this. Over a decade ago, as staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I pressed Obama administration officials on why their budget request always shortchanged munitions. Not to worry, they argued. Limited resources were better spent on slow-to-produce ships, aircraft, and other platforms. In a crisis, the U.S. could rapidly build more weapons. Congress disagreed and increased budgets for weapons. Since fiscal 2015, annual spending on missiles and munitions has more than tripled. The bigger problem is this increased spending, insufficient to begin with, hasn't led to commensurate increases in production. Take two examples: the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Munition and the Standard Missile-6, critical munitions that would be in high demand in a major war. From fiscal 2016 to 2026, procurement spending has nearly doubled for JASSM, JASSM, and more than doubled for SM-6. But production has increased only 14% for JASSM and only 23% for SM-6. This increased procurement funding doesn't even include the additional billions the U.S. spent in the same decade on research and development for these weapons. The story is the same with all major U.S. weapons programs. Increased spending hasn't led to proportionate increases in production. Funding has often been erratic and delayed, but the deeper problem is that our current weapons were never designed for mass production. Our critical munitions were conceived decades ago when many assumed the U.S. could win any war so quickly that we'd never have to expend and regenerate large numbers of weapons through ramped-up production for months or years. Government and industry optimized our weapons to be ever more exquisite, expensive, and scarce. They became the military equivalent of luxury goods, their production constrained by rare materials, specialized labor, artisanal manufacturing, bespoke components, non-commercial supply chains, and other limitations. This is a self-inflicted shortage of military power. The Trump administration can be commended for trying to expand production, But money alone won't solve this problem. We need new and different weapons that are simpler, faster, and cheaper to produce. They should be designed to be made in great numbers and by the largest possible workforce, using commercial manufacturing practices and supply chains. Our weapons have become overly complex, seeking to meet every requirement within a single munition, which leads to weapons that are effectively unproducible and irreplaceable. We need a high-low mix, small numbers of expensive, exquisite weapons for our smaller numbers of high-end threats, alongside a more affordable, more producible class of weapons for our larger number of lower-end threats. Consider a Patriot missile. Most of its cost goes toward achieving an exquisite fraction of its overall performance. We need that capability, but not in every weapon. So as we buy more Patriots, we should also create a new program to make large quantities of low-cost Patriots that deliver most of the same capability for much less money. We should create similar kinds of low-cost complements for every other type of weapon in our inventory, from cruise missiles and torpedoes to hypersonic munitions. This would enable us to conserve high-cost, hard-to-produce weapons while relying on lower-cost, high-volume weapons for our many less stressing needs. It would allow us to overwhelm our adversaries with large, affordable salvos of weapons that can be built and regenerated quickly. If we spend more money only on old, expensive weapons, we may be ready for the first day or week of a future war. But we will leave ourselves dangerously unprepared for day 30 or day 300, when we'll need an abundance of new and cheaper weapons. This is a crisis of our own making, but if we begin thinking and acting differently, we can create the order of magnitude increase in weapons of all kinds that America needs to close its missile gap. Mr. Brose is President and Chief Strategy Officer of Anduril Industries and a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The GOP's last chance to shed the tariff albatross. Import duties are driving up prices, voters worry about affordability, and November is approaching. By Jason L. Riley. The Supreme Court's decision striking down President Trump's sweeping taxes on imports was the best thing that could have happened to Republicans in an election year when they will need all the help they can get. How long will it take the GOP to realize that? The court ruled 6-3 that Mr. Trump overstepped his authority by using emergency powers to bypass Congress and impose tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico to address trade imbalances and stop drug smuggling. Like previous high court decisions that blocked the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness and eviction moratorium, the ruling strikes a blow for the constitutional separation of powers. It also provides cover to Republicans who want a course correction on tariff policy between now and November. The president remains unpersuaded, alas. His combative response to the decision showcased a deep misunderstanding of the Supreme Court's role in our representative democracy. Mr. Trump's lack of decorum, which by now is expected, was on full bipartisan display Friday. Those who disagree with the president, he made clear, aren't merely wrong, but despicable human beings with deep character flaws. He described the Republican-appointed justices who ruled against him as fools and lapdogs, who lacked the courage to do what's right for our country, while Democrat-appointed justices are against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. Mr. Trump accused conservatives on the court of being slaves to political correctness, which is an odd criticism to throw at justices who voted to overturn Roe v. Wade and ban racial preferences in college admissions. He called the court's liberals a disgrace to our nation, then added by way of praise, but you can't knock their loyalty, meaning to the party, which is one thing you can do with some of our people. Does Mr. Trump think that members of the Supreme Court have a duty of partisan loyalty? When the court ruled 8-0 in U.S. versus Nixon 1974 that executive privilege isn't limitless, 3 of those justices had been appointed by President Nixon. As bad as Mr. Trump's condescension toward Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh, who dissented, I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country. Congratulate? Justice Kavanaugh's stock has gone way up. You have to see, I'm so proud of him. Does the president think the justices want or need a pat on the head from him? Members of the court are nominated by the president and don't serve at his pleasure, unlike the members of his cabinet, who can be hired, fired, and replaced at will. Nor do they serve a ceremonial role or exist to do the executive branch's bidding. Rather, the court is an independent, co-equal branch of government tasked with determining whether the government's actions, including the president's, are constitutional and lawful. In recent years, it has usually been Democrats who were guilty of lashing out at the court to undermine its legitimacy. Sadly, Mr. Trump's response to Friday's ruling is more of the same. The reality, whether or not the president accepts it, is that tariffs have been disruptive to the economy and are deeply unpopular. They haven't reduced the trade deficit or boosted factory employment, as Mr. Trump claims they have. American consumers have grown accustomed to more options at lower prices for autos, clothing, electronics, food, and countless other goods, thanks to free trade across international borders. Higher levies on imports lead to higher cost and fewer choices. The president insists that tariffs ultimately are paid by foreigners and are necessary to protect our companies. But a recent study by the New York Federal Reserve concluded what many other studies have shown, that nearly all the economic burden from the Trump tariffs has fallen on U.S. firms and consumers. That is no surprise to anyone familiar with classical economic writings on trade, going back more than 2 centuries. But even people who have never read a word of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, or John Stuart Mill can read an electricity bill or a grocery store receipt. Mr. Trump is less bothered by higher retail prices because he thinks they are necessary to rebalance a global economy in which the U.S. supposedly has been ripped off for many decades, even as it somehow became the most prosperous nation in human history. Voters punished Democrats in 2024 over inflation, but Democrats have since won elections by campaigning on cost of living concerns. Mr. Trump wants to double down on tariffs, but that means doubling down on tax increases at a time when consumers are most worried about affordability. The president would have Republicans ignore polls on the economy, stay the course on his trade policies, and hope for the best in the fall as he tries to make mercantilism great again. It's a fool's errand. Letter to the editor. The tariff ruling was right. Regarding your editorial, Trump demeans himself on the high court. It's sad to watch the leader of our great nation act so childishly. Thankfully, the Supreme Court justices have proven that they use the Constitution as their North Star rather than some partisan political philosophy. I understand President Trump's disappointment, but the ruling is a win for America. From Frank Stalzer, Richmond, Virginia. The Pepper and Salt cartoon takes place in an office setting where a man and a woman are standing looking at a machine. And the caption reads, "For our confidential projects, we print directly to the shredder." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 25th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day or evening.